On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Christina Stejskalova. She is the Director of Data at Ontra. We're going to be talking about an interesting topic about startups and hiring data people. A lot of times, maybe startups don't hire the data person early enough. And we're going to talk about if everything's data, should the data person be hired soon enough? If we're talking about building AI strategies, again, you need some of that data first strategy as well. So we're going to go through all that with Christina. I'm super excited. Thanks for joining the show.
Thank you, Amir. I'm very excited to be here as well. This is this is one of my favorite topics to discuss. So if I can get an opportunity to talk about it, I will gladly take it.
So before we jump in, can you tell everyone what Ontra does at a high level, just to give us some context?
So basically, Ontra does contract automation in private markets, and it does this contract automation using AI. So basically, imagine that you've got your NDA and you want it to get done quickly. Ontra can help you do that.
Okay, all right, I like it. Let's jump in the topic. And I think we talked about this, about obviously data first strategies and components of when that AI strategy kicks in. Everyone now is talking about that. So it makes you start to wonder, when data people get hired, obviously the technical team can do a lot of data stuff. They do, especially in startups. It's not unheard of. At some point, a data hire is made depending on the need. And I guess the question that we were talking about, the premise of the episode was, why don't startups hire that data person sooner? And I get it. You're trying to get the MVP out. You're trying to get more functionality out. You're trying to sell more. But data is really now becoming the core of everything. So maybe let's just start at the top. When, and you've been a part of some startups and you've been down this path. When you join a company earlier versus later, how does that impact the data strategy?
So I mentioned at the beginning that I was really excited about this topic, or really intrigued by it. And that's in part of kind of my own experience. So I used to work in big tech, and I worked at Facebook at the time when it was called Facebook. And doing data at Facebook was truly incredible. At Facebook, data was really the core of the company. People really lived and breathed data. The PMs were breathing data. The engineers were, nothing would ever be released without metrics, and you would track every up and down whenever you released a product. As such, when I left, I was kind of like, data is used like this everywhere. And then after that, I kind of had the ability to start my own startup where, of course, if you kind of like read things about lean startup methodology, it's all about quick experimentation and evaluating it. So all of that made sense. And then what was really interesting for me is then I transitioned into leadership roles in specifically Series B startups. And I think that I was very surprised at what data was in Series B startups. And, of course, I only have experience from 3 companies, but I definitely find that looking across the space, you kind of see a similar pattern in that usually or these Series B companies, especially when not started by people that are data leaders, tend to have very small, if any, data functions, even up to the point of Series B. And then, I read this article or this newsletter that I think Lenny Rahitsky published about the first 10 hires in a startup. And even though I think about 30% of those startups were data startups, even those didn't include a data person. So yeah, it really kind of got me thinking about this question of why don't these startups hire data people? And again, kind of coming back to what you said about the AI strategy, the thing that I think is really interesting is, for me as a data person, data is the core of everything. If you collect data about the way people use your product, you can inform your product and you can optimize it. But more than ever with AI, data is the product, right? Without clean data, what AI do you have? And so for me, what's really interesting is that I find that there's a disconnect between people using the word data to say that, yeah, data is needed, but then the actual understanding of how we clean and use that data is very separated in these startup companies, and they do not connect that it's the data team that manages these things. Oftentimes, I find that it's the engineering team or the product team that owns data modeling, and not it's not thought of something that needs to have a specialized data team, which I don't know if I could say I agree with, but there you go.
Absolutely. And that's actually really interesting. I think everything you said completely makes sense. Obviously, data hires are expensive as well. So every startup has to be mindful of who they bring in with their value, where their role is. To be hired earlier in the stage as a data professional, do you need to be a broader skill set potentially? Is that going to help a startup? Because obviously some strategies are to hire more full stack, broader skills if you're a startup because you want people to wear multiple hats. Here you have a data person that's going to come in really good at a couple of things. If they are really heavy on the data engineering side, maybe they don't have some of the data science modeling or ML stuff. If they're heavier on the data science, maybe they're lighter on data engineering. Does that specialized nature of data professionals kind of work differently versus early stage startups that are hiring, software engineers?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and I think that perception of data as a cost center, that's how companies view it, and that's probably why it exists that way. For me, a data team is good or great only if it delivers impact, and so I think the point that you're making about having a broader skill set is right on, especially in the beginning, because I believe that perception is a cost center that should be countered. Data can provide impact and in fact drive revenue because the insights that you uncover can inform a product strategy, right? Or perhaps more importantly, and this is often what it does, prevent you from pursuing the build out of a very big product if it's not working. And so, I do agree. If you choose to be in a role where you don't have a big data team, probably will be countered with the perception that data is just a cost center. And part of the reason that data is not involved in a lot of these things is it sounds like we just make things more expensive because we might insist on some ways to do data modeling, or we have to add data logging, and who even needs that? It's not part of the product. We might change it all. But if you really flip the framework and you really frame it on value, that changes everything, right? Data logging is not a cost to the business. It's a way for you to quickly evaluate if something works. If you can build smaller products, quicker iterations, that actually saves the company money. And then I agree with the second piece that definitely as a data leader in a smaller company like that, beyond the insight, you need to go the extra mile to actually implement the insights, because otherwise, if nobody implements your insights, you are a cost center because you're just producing insights that are not having impact. But if you can drive a marketing campaign with that, that changes things around completely. And again, it's all about showing, if I believe strongly that the best companies in the world use data to drive their revenue growth. And I think that that's really the mindset that you kind of want to change or grow in a startup as well.
I guess if you're going to join a startup, you're a data professional and you want to show value early, obviously we talked about having a bit more diverse skill set is one thing, but not everybody's going to have that, right? So if you're joining early, you want to make that impact, and you just mentioned a few areas you could. How do you help articulate that to founding teams so they or the startup leadership to understand that yes, you don't have to be a cost center. Here are the things that I can take off your plate. It's not a case of I'm creating more work for you, because that could be the perception.
Yeah, 100%. I think I always like to use the approach that I try to do most of the work to kind of create that value. So I guess to take it a step back, with respect to the founders or the managing team, what you basically try and identify is what burning problems have they had. And it's best if you kind of identify burning problems that have been around for a long time. I tend to find that those often appear in things like sales and marketing. What's also nice about those is, especially in environments where the data culture might not be as high, it's sometimes harder to get things implemented on a product level. But the nice thing is with sales and marketing is their incentives are aligned with numbers. Like the sales team must drive certain quotas and goals. So if you suggest something to them that could improve their sales conversion, they tend to be open to that. So again, the approach is kind of really figure out what problems the founders have had for a while, especially ones that they've tried to solve and they have not had success. And exactly then try and figure out how to take them off the plate, and ideally identify a small project where you can have impact quickly. And that kind of leads to the marketing and sales piece, and marketing in particular. Email campaigns, probably my favorite place to provide quick impact. Email campaigns happen quickly. They're very measurable, easy to measure, and tons of experimentation opportunity. So I think really the prime place for data to shine. And again, to your point of like, hey, but doesn't a data person just crunch numbers? I find that, where data can really add value is, even in suggesting what content should be put, or like, doing headline tests, or even the fact that you set up an experiment where you prioritize which email campaign to run based on sample sizes. Those are immediate ways that you as a data person can show impact. And what's nice is that those results, when they happen quickly and you show them across the board, you get people really excited. So I find that those are effective ways to show impact quickly.
As we are now hearing everything about AI, data is coming to the forefront. People are talking about data governance. They're talking about stuff that no one cared about, data quality, all this stuff that everyone kind of knew would be issues when we were doing simple reporting or simpler reporting, simpler analytic solutions. There are bigger problems now. I guess when you're thinking about companies that are now thinking and focusing on this AI strategy, and maybe it's long term, right? I mean, I don't think we're in a position right now to guess the timeline for when companies will implement AI and get it right. But obviously now we know some of the fundamentals we're going to need. If you're approaching data first strategy, and this could probably apply to startups, could apply to larger enterprises as well. Some of this legwork has to go in, whether you're really, wherever you are on the AI maturity curve, we could say. And some of that does maybe associate to non-interesting work, and maybe it's harder to sell people on it. But if you're going with a data first strategy, how do you position that, especially in the interview? Like, you want to make sure the company understands, hey, if you do want to implement your AI strategy, hey, Mr. and Mrs. CTO, this is what I'm going to be looking to do. It's going to be some fundamentals, and we got to get it done.
I think the critical component of your question was people are thinking about data cleaning. And I think that that's the critical component, thinking. And I don't think, and oftentimes do not see those two being the same things. I was literally recently at a conference where, they spent an hour presenting all of the AI products that they're going to build. And the first slide said the foundation of everything is data. But then the next slide just talked about all the things they could do with that data. They not once mentioned how they clean that data, what the source data is, and perhaps most importantly, what's the impact of having bad data that you feed into any of these products and what you do. And I think that again reflects the way that kind of data is seen, right? It's this cleaning of data, and the importance of that is something that I feel data teams care mostly about. At the end of the day, I still think that if you see a product that is based on data in an AI sense, I don't think that the customer is necessarily going to care about the cleanliness of the data or how you've thought about storing it. So to me, again, coming back to your question of how do you sell the strategy, I think that needs to all come from the data team and the data leader. I believe that the goal and the role that data teams now especially have is to drive that. We should be the ones that know the most about data, the way we can use it, and most importantly, what the risks are of wrong interpretation. I don't think that that's necessarily how we lead with our stakeholders. That's something we need to understand that we do. And then what we need to do is sell why that's important on the product end side. So, okay, great. We'll build you a customer health score. And you know what's really great about the data team? We can do it beyond what this tool can do because you also will be able to see that it's right. And you're going to avoid a costly mistake that might cost you X. So I think from a business perspective, it's always talking about what the outcome of not having the good infrastructure can be in the terms of the goals that they speak. So in their outward product goals. I don't believe that will necessarily lead everyone to investing into high data quality. I think that will always be something somewhat boring, but I think it's something that the data team has to lead. And again, by proving an impact, stakeholders will eventually be like, what they say is right, but we'll let them deal with it.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because I think, the right data leader with the right strategy, the right ability to position, it sounds like you might be investing short term, but if you are AI first strategy, data for whatever it is you want to call your strategy, it sounds like you're going to save a lot down the road because eventually some of this stuff will crop up. And just based on your experience, I guess when you kind of defer some of these things and you have to come back, I kind of, if we think about software engineering and we think about Scrum, a lot of this is predicated on catch the issue sooner because it's costly later. When it comes to data strategy, obviously, I'm assuming sooner is less costly than later. Is that a fair assessment?
100%. And that's exactly it. I think like what's really interesting with AI is that obviously everyone can now go to a chatbot and they can make a prompt and they can get a response. And as a result of that, I think that obscures some of the complexities of the long-term effects. And it's even more tricky because in a situation that you described, if an engineer built something and it works, if you do that 100 times, it should still continue to work the same way. So if you have an engineer building AI products, they're going to assume that the same thing happens, but we know that that's not how the models work. And the thing that I think, so that's the thing that's so interesting with data, and I think that that's what really sets apart the Facebooks, the Amazons, the Googles of the world to the other startups, is those companies understand that there's subtlety with the data, which is why you need a team of experts to look at it. It's not because, yes, everyone can like run a regression in Excel, but really the skill that the data team has is in interpreting the data and in actually understanding what its limitations are. And that's the thing that is so important, because not understanding those limitations means that then you can build products that once your model starts having hallucinations down the line, you have no idea how to stop that because, well, we didn't think about that. And that's again where the data team needs to lead, but it makes sense that without having that expertise in other like areas, like if you're on a business side or something like that, you might not have that nuanced understanding of it, and it might feel adverse to business goals, which is again why I think, especially in that startup stage, it's really important for the data team to understand what the needs of the business stakeholders are and build the data strategy alongside the needs. And eventually, as the company grows and you really show the value, hopefully that just becomes something that makes common sense. And then you're off to a party. Otherwise, I don't think it ends well.
Yeah, and you know what? Like, I think, we're talking in the context of earlier stage companies, and it is expensive to hire data teams. I think data has become more technical. I think if we were looking 20 years ago, data was technical. Is not as technical it is now, right? There's so many different moving parts, so many specialized roles, whether it's ops, it's data engineering, ML, data science. There's a lot more specialization, whereas before, just like software engineering, I feel it's very much mirrored. I think software engineering, most people understand that there is certain, indoctrinated processes, activities that happen with data because it was born from the business side. I feel it was born from the business side. I could be wrong. That's a whole different episode. Somebody will probably tell me, Amir, you're wrong, which is true. It served a business purpose in the beginning. And I think I had a guest once mention the reason data is viewed the way it is because there's an executive somewhere that thinks I could just go get this data and do something myself. If they need a button someplace, they're not going to go, I can go put that button wherever I need it, or I need this, drop that. Those are things they can't do. But I think data, there's a belief that, but they can't with the data volumes we're talking about if we're talking about the sophisticated data solutions. But hey, I can go grab Excel and load a bunch of rows and try to mimic whatever it is that you're providing. Not that they will or they won't, but that's what they think maybe.
Yeah, and I think that is a very fair point. And I believe that is true. There's definitely, you can do a lot of analytics yourself and tools like Excel and all that. And I would encourage everyone in a company to do that. And I think that if you have that, that's great. I think the principles of data for me are more around the fact that you should have a measurement at minimum. So it's very important to make sure you have goals for any project you release, and that once you release anything, you're able to figure out whether or not it worked. And if you're doing all of that, then you're using a data-driven approach, and I'm kind of a big fan of that. I think that the reason that you need a data team has just become more apparent because data has become the product. Before, when we didn't have big data, yes, you could do all of those things, but in a world where you have so much data, that's what really requires a more nuanced, a more specialized approach to data as a product. But you're totally right. It depends on the scenario that you're in. I think that if companies are using AI to build products, then in that case, that's a must because data is the product. In a company where, I don't know, maybe you only have like 100 plus customers and you can and most of your reporting requires you to calculate conversions, you're absolutely right. You don't necessarily need an analyst. If you have somebody from the finance world, they could definitely do all those same things. And with all the marketing tools and in general all the data tools out there, a lot of these things have become much easier. So yeah, I think you're right to draw the distinction in the sense that maybe part of the reason that there's no data people hired in the beginning is because you could do some of these things yourself. And I don't disagree with that. I think that what I notice is that I don't always see that. But if you have somebody that does use data to drive decisions, that's wonderful. What's more worrying is if you're at a stage where you're like, we did all these things, and you ask the question of, okay, well, what worked? And somebody can't answer that question. I find that that's the problem. But you're right that it doesn't need to have a data person to answer that, especially in the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, everything I hear, in our discussion, everything you talk about, I see the value of that data strategy early. I think I also see I'm in a recruiting company. We work with a lot of companies that are building out engineering teams, and the founders are hiring software engineers to produce more products. So I see them picking up the data, and I see when they hire the first data engineer or data leader. And it is very interesting because I think every company, maybe previous to 2022, had a very specific strategy. I'm very interested in seeing what's going to happen as we see more native AI products and more data first products to tie into AI solutions out there. I am going to be interested to see if people will be like, you know what, we're going to have to budget that data leader, that data expert sooner, because it's just going to be easier for us to align from the ground up versus trying to, pay out technical debt back, as we should probably call it.
And, I was just, as you were speaking about that and how the companies are hiring software engineers, and, software engineers tend to be more expensive than data people. And if you read any lean product startup books, the thing they talk about is that you shouldn't build first. So I think for me, what's really curious is that companies do hire expensive engineers to build products. When in my head, I'm thinking, well, actually, imagine if you flip the script and instead of building anything, I mean, maybe at that point in time you feel very confident, but if you have somebody that's a data person, or even if you are a creative person and you make a video of your MVP product and you release it and you actually measure whether or not it works, I feel that you could do your whole product development in that early stage without building anything. And in that case, why are you hiring these engineers? Because that to me is cheaper, right? You could have one person that makes product videos, one data person. Instead of a team of engineers, you could build nothing, but you would build, let's say, 50 videos of MVPs and figure out which one of those your customers really want, and then end up building that. So I guess that's the other way to see it. And maybe that's the way that I see it. So if you don't hire a data team, to me, it doesn't make sense that you do hire an engineering team, because that one is more costly. And my understanding is that you should first validate before you build. But yeah.
Well, I think it's an interesting discussion because, there's certainly different drivers for different decisions. And I think I think we mentioned, I think things are changing. So the value of data as a product, AI first strategy, all these things are going to drive other downstream decisions. And I do actually talk to a lot of executives and mention that I personally believe data engineers are just specialized software engineers. I don't actually draw a distinction. I think, I think some of the labels we add data in front of terminology is some of it's carried over from previous, technical booms where we needed to first it was you were a SQL developer, then you became a BI engineer, and now you became a data engineer. I think as you've been getting more technical, people are becoming more software engineering like. So I think, who knows, maybe 2-3 years from now, everyone's a software engineer within data specialties. So definitely appreciate your time. I think we scratched the surface. We didn't exhaust the topic. I'm sure some of the things are going to pop some questions for people. If they would want to reach out to you, what's a good way of touching base with you?
Yeah, definitely LinkedIn. You can find me with my name, which is Christina Stejskalova. There's not many of us out there, so it's pretty easy.
Awesome. I'll make sure to include that in the show notes. And again, thank you very much for being on the show. That's it for the episode. I'll be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, really two things. One, I think it's a great topic, debating when to hire a data professional, especially at a earlier stage startup. I think that's a really interesting topic. I think a lot of what we talked about of now AI coming to the forefront might alter people's opinions and views of when that data expert comes in. Please let us know. Let me know what you think. I'd love to kind of hear from you guys and see what you've seen work and not work. Like, subscribe. Let me know how the podcast is going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.